Welcome everyone to another episode of Tutorial Tuesday. It's week number 12, 2019. I'm glad that you're along with us. This is where I take on your questions relating to photography, self-employment, and doing this for a living. But first, I always start out with a couple of announcements. Announcement number one. I was featured on the Let Freedom Reign podcast, and if you haven't tuned into that, go ahead and swipe over and take a listen. This is where I talk the most about making a transition from the corporate world to actually being self-employed and doing this full time. So again, go ahead and swipe over, tune into that. Announcement number two is if you haven't already gotten in on March's photography challenge, you'll definitely want to get in on that. This is all about deliberately composing an image and filling that frame with the things that you want. If you want to read the rules and get in on that, go ahead and swipe over to my blog and read about that. Let's get right into your questions. There are a couple things that you need to know here. Number one, your editing time is going to change dependent specifically upon whether you're editing for yourself and letting those creative juices flow, or you're editing for a client and you need to get images out the door. So for me, if I'm just doing my own edit and I'm just following my creativity wherever it follows, wherever it leads me to, I can expect to sit down for anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes to just kind of maneuver through that. Now, on the other hand, if I'm working for a client and I'm working against a deadline with them, I'll spend no more than 3 to 5 minutes per image, but most of those then would have a synchronized preset in Lightroom. And the old cliche is true, time is money. Yes, if I were to hang my hat on one thing, I would say consistency. But I always have to balance that because consistency is the enemy of creativity, and you get into ruts. But be consistent about what you do. Whenever we do something new, it always seems a little chaotic, whether it's playing basketball for the first time or going to a branding for the first time. Things seem a little chaotic, but there's actually a flow to it, and you learn to work around it. Good question here. When I'm doing my wide angle sports shots, how do I keep from getting ran over, and do I set the shot up ahead of time? The answer is no. I don't set the shot up ahead of time when it comes to ranch life activity. Usually what I'm doing is observing the actions of the people in front of me, and then I'm adjusting accordingly when I get in there. And when I say adjust accordingly, I'm talking about getting a feel for the proximity of the subject. So when I'm at 16 millimeters, my subject is usually a foot or less away from me. Now, other than ranch life, let's say a barrel racer or something like that, turning a barrel, I will watch the pattern a couple times just to make sure I have a decent feel for where the horse and the rider are going to be, and then I'll set up appropriately. So short answer is no, I don't set those up for ranch life, but in other shoots, yes, sometimes I do. Good question. Thanks for asking. Absolutely, in seconds, we can lose that image. I would even argue and say that you've already lost the image by the time you've taken the image. But for me, it's all feel. So when something is lining up, when I see someone's expression, it's a feel and I hit the shutter. Watermarks is definitely one of those topics that is reoccurring. I've addressed this on many of my Tuesday tutorials, and I've also even had a discussion about it with my attorney that's on my YouTube channel. So what I'm going to do is provide you a link by swiping over to one of the last Tutorial Tuesdays that I had, and had a nice in-depth discussion about how I use my watermarks and where I place it and all that stuff. So go ahead and swipe over there and take a look. Thank you for the question. I think this is one of those things that we take for granted as we go down our photography path. But the simple answer to this question is you need a fast shutter speed to stop that action from blurring. So for example, if I'm trying to stop a rope in the air as a cowboy is swinging it, I'm going to need something in the neighborhood of 1/1500th of a second to 1/2500th of a second to stop that rope in midair and freeze it. Now, to finish up with this question, you also need to make sure that you're in a good position holding your camera so that your hands aren't shaking and you're not causing that blur yourself. Lightroom is my primary platform, and from there I go right into Photoshop. So yes, Lightroom first, then Photoshop.